The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen adjusted her scope one final time. 3 years of specialized training had led to this moment. She was the first female sniper to be deployed with the SEAL reconnaissance team, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like the heavy pack she carried. The mission briefing had been clear, but dangerous. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding in a remote compound nestled between two mountain peaks. The compound was supposedly lightly defended, making it perfect for a small team insertion. What intelligence had failed to mention was the network of caves and hidden positions that dotted the surrounding hills like a spider's web. Chen had grown up in rural Montana, where her father taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts before she could properly ride a bike. By age 12, she could hit a target at 300 yards with iron sights. Her natural ability caught the attention of military recruiters during a shooting competition at the county fair. They promised her adventure and purpose, but she never imagined it would lead her to these desolate mountains halfway around the world. The SEAL team she was attached to consisted of 6 hardened warriors, each with multiple deployments under their belt. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison led the team with quiet confidence that came from years of successful operations. His men respected him not just for his rank, but for the way he brought everyone home. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez was the communications expert, his steady hands capable of maintaining radio contact even under the heaviest fire. Thompson handled explosives with an artist's touch, while Davis and Murphy rounded out the team as the muscle and the medic respectively. Initially, the SEALs had been skeptical about having a female sniper attached to their unit. It wasn't personal, they explained, but team chemistry was everything in their line of work. One weak link could get everyone killed. Chen understood their concerns and set out to prove herself during training exercises. She outshot most of them on the range and could carry her own weight during 20-mile hikes with full gear. Slowly, their skepticism turned to grudging respect. The helicopter insertion had gone smoothly in the pre-dawn darkness. They landed 2 kilometers from the target compound and began their approach through terrain that looked like the surface of Mars. Jagged rocks and loose scree made every step treacherous, while the thin mountain air left even these elite soldiers breathing hard. Chen carried her specialized auto-sniper rifle, a weapon capable of rapid, accurate fire at distances exceeding 800 meters. The rifle was her constant companion, and she knew every component as intimately as a musician knows their instrument. As they moved through the rocky landscape, Morrison used hand signals to coordinate their advance. The plan was simple: establish overwatch positions around the compound, identify the target, and call in extraction once they had eyes on the high-value individual. If things went sideways, they had air support on standby and multiple extraction routes planned. Chen took position on a ridge that provided clear sight lines to the compound below. Through her scope, she could see the simple stone buildings that intelligence photos had shown them during briefing. Everything appeared quiet, almost too quiet. The other team members spread out to establish a perimeter, each finding concealment among the rocks and sparse vegetation. The compound consisted of 3 buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Intelligence suggested their target was likely in the largest building, which served as both living quarters and meeting space. Chen methodically scanned each window and doorway looking for any sign of movement. The morning was eerily silent except for the occasional sound of wind whistling through the rocky outcroppings. Morrison's voice crackled softly through her earpiece, confirming that all team members were in position. The waiting game began. In her years of training, Chen had learned that patience was a sniper's greatest virtue. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes in this environment were usually fatal. She controlled her breathing and settled in for what could be a long surveillance operation. As the sun climbed higher, Chen noticed something that made her stomach tighten with unease. Small movements in the rocks above and around their position caught her attention. At first, she dismissed them as shadows or perhaps small animals, but the pattern was too regular, too purposeful. Someone else was moving through these mountains, and they weren't alone. She keyed her radio with 2 quick clicks, the predetermined signal for potential contact. Morrison acknowledged with a single click, indicating he had received her warning. Chen continued scanning through her scope, trying to get a better assessment of what they were facing. What she saw made her blood run cold. Armed figures were moving through positions that would give them clear fields of fire down on the SEAL team's location. The compound hadn't been lightly defended as intelligence suggested. Instead, it was the center of a carefully planned trap. The high-value target was likely never there at all. Someone had fed them false information, and now 6 of America's elite warriors were walking into an ambush that could destroy them all. Chen counted at least 12 enemy fighters taking positions in the rocks above them. Each carried automatic weapons and moved with the practiced efficiency of experienced fighters who knew this terrain intimately. They were being methodical, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. The SEAL team was spread out in a valley with limited cover and no easy escape routes. Morrison's voice came through her earpiece, calm but urgent. He had spotted the movement too and was calling for immediate extraction. But Chen could see what he couldn't from his position. Enemy fighters had already moved to block their primary and secondary extraction routes. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and about to face the fight of their lives in terrain that favored their enemies. The trap was closing, and Chen realized she might be the only thing standing between her team and total disaster. Her specialized training and position on the ridge gave her advantages the others didn't have. She could see the entire battlefield and had the range to engage targets that were beyond the effective reach of the team's standard weapons. Everything she had trained for, every shot she had fired in practice, had led to this moment when 6 lives would depend on her ability to turn the tide of an impossible battle. The first shots rang out like thunder echoing through the mountain valley. Chen watched through her scope as muzzle flashes erupted from positions she had identified moments earlier. The enemy had sprung their trap with devastating precision, catching the SEAL team in a crossfire that turned their overwatch positions into death traps. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos on the radio, calm despite the bullets cracking overhead. He was calling for covering fire and coordinating movement, but Chen could see what he couldn't. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly to cut off every escape route. Automatic weapons fire rained down from the rocks above while hidden fighters blocked the paths back to their insertion point. Rodriguez was the first to take a hit. Chen watched helplessly as the communications specialist stumbled and dropped behind a boulder, clutching his shoulder. Red stained his uniform as he struggled to maintain radio contact with their air support. Without communications, they would be completely cut off from any hope of extraction or assistance. Thompson had taken cover behind a fallen tree, but his position was being systematically destroyed by concentrated fire from at least 3 different directions. Chunks of wood exploded around him as bullets tore through his meager cover. He tried to return fire, but every time he raised his weapon, a new volley forced him back down. Davis and Murphy were pinned in a shallow depression that provided minimal protection from the plunging fire coming from above. They had managed to drag Rodriguez to their position, but the medic was struggling to treat the wounded man while bullets sparked off the rocks around them. Their ammunition was already running low, and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply. Morrison had found cover behind a large boulder, but his position was isolated from the rest of his team. Chen could see enemy fighters moving to flank him, working their way through the rocks with practiced stealth. In minutes, they would have clear shots at his position from multiple angles. The team leader who had brought so many men home safely was about to be overwhelmed by superior numbers and position. Chen forced herself to breathe slowly and control her racing heart. Panic would get everyone killed. She had trained for situations like this, though nothing in training had quite prepared her for the reality of watching her teammates fight for their lives while she was the only one in position to help them. Her auto-sniper rifle was designed for exactly this type of engagement. Unlike traditional bolt-action sniper rifles that required manual cycling between shots, her weapon could deliver rapid, accurate fire at extreme range. The trade-off was increased weight and complexity, but in this situation, those disadvantages were meaningless compared to her ability to engage multiple targets quickly. She identified her first target, an enemy fighter who had positioned himself to fire down on Morrison's location. The range was 847 meters according to her laser rangefinder, well within the effective range of her weapon. Chen adjusted for wind and elevation, then squeezed the trigger with the steady pressure her father had taught her years ago on that Montana ranch. The suppressed rifle made a sharp crack that was lost in the sounds of battle below. Through her scope, she watched the enemy fighter drop from his position. 1 down, but at least 11 more to go, and they would quickly realize they were taking fire from an unexpected direction. Chen immediately shifted to her next target, a machine gunner who was raking Thompson's position with devastating fire. This shot was more difficult, as the target was partially concealed behind rocks. She had to wait for him to expose himself while firing, then put her bullet through a gap barely wider than her fist. The shot took him in the upper chest, spinning him away from his weapon. The enemy fighters were adapting quickly to this new threat. Chen could see them pointing in her direction and repositioning to engage her. Her elevated position gave her excellent fields of fire, but it also made her visible to anyone who knew where to look. She would have to move soon or risk being overrun. Thompson used the brief respite from machine gun fire to sprint to a better position, but he stumbled on the loose rock and went down hard. Chen could see blood on his leg through her scope. The explosives expert was wounded and struggling to reach cover as enemy fire intensified around his new position. Morrison keyed his radio with the code for immediate extraction, but Chen could hear the strain in his voice. Their primary extraction zone was compromised and the secondary site was under enemy observation. The helicopter pilots would be flying into a hornet's nest if they attempted a pickup without the landing zone being secured first. A new threat emerged as Chen spotted enemy fighters moving through a concealed position she hadn't noticed before. They were working their way around to flank Davis and Murphy's position. If they succeeded, the medic and the wounded Rodriguez would be completely exposed to enfilading fire with no cover. Chen shifted her aim to engage these new targets, but they were moving tactically, using cover and concealment effectively. She managed to hit one as he crossed between rocks, but the others immediately went to ground. They knew approximately where her fire was coming from now, and they were adapting their movement accordingly. The sound of incoming artillery made everyone freeze for a moment. The enemy had called in mortar support, and the first rounds impacted near Thompson's position. Explosion after explosion walked across the battlefield as the enemy gunners adjusted their aim. The SEALs were being methodically destroyed by an enemy that had planned this ambush down to the last detail. Rodriguez managed to get his radio working despite his wound, and Chen could hear him calling frantically for air support. But the closest attack aircraft were still 20 minutes away, and the team didn't have 20 minutes. At their current rate of ammunition expenditure, they would be out of bullets long before help arrived. Chen made a decision that would have horrified her instructors back in sniper school. Instead of maintaining her overwatch position and picking off individual targets, she was going to have to leave her concealed position and move closer to the fight. Her auto-sniper rifle could provide the rapid, accurate fire that might break up the enemy assault, but she would have to expose herself to do it. She began moving down from her ridge position, using every piece of cover and concealment the rocky terrain provided. The weight of her rifle and equipment made the descent treacherous, but she had trained for movement under fire. Each step brought her closer to effective range for her teammates' weapons, while putting her in greater danger from enemy fire. As she moved, Chen could hear the increasing desperation in Morrison's voice as he tried to coordinate his scattered team's defense. They were running out of options, ammunition, and time. The enemy was closing in from multiple directions, and without immediate intervention, the entire team would be overrun within minutes. Chen reached a rocky outcrop that put her within 400 meters of the heaviest fighting. From this position, she could see the enemy fighters who were preparing to overrun Davis and Murphy's position. 3 men with automatic rifles were moving through the rocks, using hand signals to coordinate their final assault. They had no idea she was behind them. Her first shot took the lead fighter center mass, dropping him instantly. The second man spun around, trying to locate the source of the gunfire, but Chen's second shot found him before he could raise his weapon. The third fighter dove for cover, but she could track his movement through her scope. When he tried to peek around a boulder to spot her, her third shot ended his threat permanently. The sudden elimination of the flanking attack gave Davis and Murphy breathing room to reposition Rodriguez and return effective fire on their original attackers. Chen could hear Murphy shouting medical instructions as he worked on Rodriguez's wound while continuing to engage targets. The Navy corpsman was performing miracles under impossible conditions. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece with new urgency. Enemy reinforcements were moving up from the compound below, at least 8 more fighters with heavy weapons. The trap had been even more elaborate than they initially realized. The enemy had planned for multiple contingencies and had enough manpower to overwhelm even elite special operations forces. Chen shifted her position to get a better angle on the compound. Through her scope, She could see the reinforcements moving in a tactical formation that spoke of professional military training. These weren't local militia fighters, but experienced soldiers who understood battlefield tactics. They carried RPGs and machine guns that would devastate the pinned SEAL team. Her auto sniper rifle had been designed specifically for this type of target-rich environment. She could engage multiple enemies in rapid succession without the delay of manually cycling her weapon. Chen settled into a stable shooting position and began systematically engaging the reinforcement column. Her first shot dropped the RPG gunner, just as he was preparing to fire on Thompson's position. The rocket-propelled grenade exploded harmlessly against the mountainside instead of devastating the SEAL's cover. Her second and third shots took down the machine gun team before they could establish a firing position. The remaining reinforcements scattered, but Chen had disrupted their coordinated assault. Instead of a disciplined advance, they were now reacting to an unexpected threat from an unknown position. She continued to engage targets of opportunity, forcing them to take cover and disrupting their ability to support the original ambush force. Thompson used the confusion to bound to a better position, his wounded leg slowing him but not stopping his tactical movement. The explosives expert had spotted something Chen couldn't see from her angle. He was working his way toward a position where he could use his demolitions expertise to even the odds. Rodriguez had managed to re-establish communications with their air support despite his wound. Chen could hear him coordinating with incoming attack helicopters, providing targeting information for the enemy positions that were still engaging the team, but the aircraft were still 15 minutes away, and the battle was reaching its climax. A new threat emerged as Chen spotted movement in the rocks above Morrison's position. Two enemy fighters had worked their way around to a position where they could fire down on the team leader with impunity. Morrison was focused on coordinating his team's defense and hadn't spotted the immediate danger. To his own position, Chen had to make a difficult shot through a narrow gap between boulders while the targets were moving. She led the first fighter by several feet, anticipating his movement, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet caught him in the torso, sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. His partner immediately took cover, but Chen had bought Morrison precious seconds to reposition. The sound of explosions from Thompson's direction announced that the demolitions expert had reached his objective. He had identified a choke point where the enemy reinforcements would have to pass, and had placed charges to create a rock slide. The controlled avalanche blocked the main approach route and trapped several enemy fighters in the open where they became easy targets for the rest of the team. Murphy's medical training was proving as valuable as his combat skills. He had stabilized Rodriguez enough that the communication specialist could continue coordinating with air support while still providing covering fire. The corpsman's ability to keep wounded teammates in the fight was making the difference between victory and disaster. Chen's ammunition was running low, and she knew the enemy would eventually locate her position through muzzle flash and sound triangulation. She had to make every shot count, while looking for an opportunity to reposition before she became a target herself. The rocky terrain that had initially favored the enemy was now working in her favor as she used it to mask her movement between firing positions. Morrison had rallied his scattered team into a more defensible position, using the chaos Chen had created to consolidate their forces. They were still outnumbered, but they were no longer separated and fighting individual battles for survival. The team leader's tactical expertise was turning their desperate defense into an organized resistance. The enemy was adapting to the new situation, but their original plan had been disrupted beyond recovery. Instead of executing a carefully planned ambush, they were now fighting a fluid battle against opponents who had regained the initiative. Chen's intervention had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the engagement. Davis had found a position where he could provide overwatch for the rest of the team while Chen continued to engage targets at longer range. The two snipers were now working in coordination, with Davis handling closer targets while Chen engaged enemies at extended range with her specialized weapon. A mortar round exploded dangerously close to Chen's position, showering her with rock fragments and dust. The enemy had finally identified her general location and was calling in indirect fire to suppress her. She would have to move immediately or risk being eliminated by the next salvo. Chen began a tactical withdrawal to a secondary position she had identified during her initial reconnaissance. The move would temporarily reduce her effectiveness, but it was necessary to avoid the incoming mortar fire. As she moved, she could see that the battle was reaching a critical point where the next few minutes would determine the outcome for everyone involved. The mortar barrage intensified as Chen sprinted between rocky outcrops, each explosion sending deadly fragments whistling through the air around her. She could feel the concussion waves from near misses as she dove into a narrow crevice that would provide temporary shelter. Her new position offered a different angle on the battlefield, but the enemy was learning to anticipate her movements. From her concealed position, Chen could see that the SEAL team had managed to form a defensive perimeter around a cluster of large boulders. Morrison had successfully consolidated his scattered forces, but their ammunition situation was becoming critical. Each man was down to his last few magazines, and the enemy seemed to have unlimited supplies. Rodriguez, despite his shoulder wound, had established reliable communications with the incoming air support. Through her earpiece, Chen could hear him providing detailed targeting information to the attack helicopter pilots. The aircraft were now only 8 minutes away, but 8 minutes might as well be 8 hours given their current situation. Thompson had created additional obstacles using his remaining explosives, channeling enemy movement into kill zones where the team could concentrate their limited firepower. His wounded leg was clearly causing him significant pain, but the demolitions expert continued to move tactically and contribute to their defense. Chen spotted a new threat developing on the eastern ridge. A team of enemy fighters was setting up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun in a position that would give them a clear field of fire across the entire SEAL defensive position. Once that weapon was operational, it would be impossible for any of the team members to move or maneuver. The range to the machine gun position was over 950 meters, near the maximum effective range of her weapon system. The targets were partially concealed behind a rocky parapet they had constructed, making precise shot placement critical. Chen would have to wait for them to expose themselves while setting up their weapon. She steadied her rifle against a rock ledge and controlled her breathing as she had been taught. The wind at this altitude was tricky, swirling unpredictably around the mountain peaks. She had to estimate the wind speed and direction based on the movement of dust and debris she could see through her scope. The machine gunner exposed himself as he positioned the weapon's bipod legs. Chen led the target slightly, accounting for the range and wind, then squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the man drop away from the weapon. His assistant immediately tried to take over the gun, but Chen's follow-up shot eliminated him as well. The third member of the machine gun team dragged the weapon back behind cover, but Chen had bought the SEAL team precious time. Without that heavy weapon in operation, they could continue to move and fight, effectively instead of being pinned down in a static position where they would eventually be overrun. Murphy's voice came through the radio with a situation report that made everyone's blood run cold. They were down to less than 30 rounds per man, and the enemy was preparing for what appeared to be a final assault. Multiple groups of fighters were moving into position for a coordinated attack that would hit the SEAL perimeter from 3 directions simultaneously. Chen could see the enemy preparations through her scope. They were being methodical and professional, taking time to coordinate their assault despite the pressure of incoming air support. These fighters knew that they had only a few minutes to finish the job before attack. Helicopters would turn the tide decisively in favor of the Americans. Morrison made the decision to consolidate their remaining ammunition into the hands of their best shooters. Davis and Thompson would provide precision fire, while Murphy and Rodriguez focused on keeping the wounded operational and maintaining communications. It was a desperate gambit, but it maximized their combat effectiveness with limited resources. Chen realized she was in a unique position to disrupt the enemy's final assault. Her elevated position and long-range capability allowed her to engage the assault teams before they could close with the main SEAL position. But she would have to expose herself to effective counterfire to do it. The first assault team began their advance from the north, moving tactically from cover to cover as they closed the distance to the SEAL perimeter. Chen engaged the lead elements, forcing them to take cover and disrupting their timing. Her rapid, accurate fire broke up their formation and sent them scrambling for better concealment. A second assault team was moving up from the west, but they had learned from watching their comrades. They were using smoke grenades to obscure their movement and making it difficult for Chen to acquire clear targets. She had to wait for them to emerge from the smoke clouds before she could engage effectively. The third assault team was approaching from the south, directly toward Morrison's position. They were the largest group, at least 6 fighters with automatic weapons and grenades. If they reached the SEAL perimeter, the close-quarters battle would quickly overwhelm the defenders. Chen made a tactical decision that would have shocked her instructors. Instead of remaining in her concealed position and providing overwatch, she began moving to a position where she could provide direct support to the team. Her auto-sniper rifle could deliver rapid, accurate fire at closer ranges, essentially functioning as a designated marksman rifle. As she moved, mortar rounds began impacting around the SEAL position with increasing accuracy. The enemy had finally gotten their indirect fire dialed in, and each explosion sent deadly fragments across the defensive perimeter. Chen could see Murphy dragging Rodriguez to better cover while continuing to treat his wound. Thompson had positioned himself where he could observe all 3 approach routes and was calling out target information to his teammates. Despite his wounded leg and dwindling ammunition, the explosives expert was functioning as the team's tactical coordinator, while Morrison focused on overall command and control. The sound of rotor blades, echoing off the mountain walls, announced that their air support was finally approaching the battlefield. But Chen could see that the enemy assault teams were only minutes away from their final positions. It was going to be a race between the attacking fighters and the arriving helicopters. Rodriguez was desperately trying to coordinate with the helicopter pilots, providing them with friendly positions and target priorities. The communications had to be perfect, or the air support might accidentally engage the wrong targets in the confused mountain terrain. Chen reached a position where she could directly support the SEAL team's defense, but it also put her within range of enemy small arms fire. She could hear bullets cracking overhead as enemy fighters began to locate and engage her new position. The next few minutes would determine whether her decision to leave her concealed overwatch position would save the team or get them all killed. The enemy assault was beginning from multiple directions simultaneously, and Chen could see muzzle flashes erupting all around the SEAL perimeter. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and everything would depend on whether 7 American warriors could hold out against overwhelming odds until their air support could turn the tide of battle. The 3 assault teams hit the SEAL perimeter simultaneously, creating a chaos of gunfire and explosions that echoed off the mountain walls like thunder. Chen found herself in the middle of the most intense firefight of her career, with enemy fighters advancing from multiple directions while friendly forces fought desperately to maintain their defensive positions. Her new position allowed her to engage targets at closer range with devastating effect. The auto-sniper rifle's rapid-fire capability proved invaluable as she switched between targets, dropping enemy fighters who were attempting to flank Morrison's position. Each shot had to count, as her ammunition was also running critically low. The Northern assault team had advanced closer than expected, using the smoke and confusion to mask their movement. Chen could see them preparing to rush the final 50 meters to the SEAL position when she engaged them with a rapid series of shots that broke their assault momentum. 2 fighters dropped immediately, while the others dove for whatever cover they could find. Murphy was performing combat medicine under impossible conditions, treating Rodriguez's wound while simultaneously engaging targets with his sidearm. The corpsman had managed to stop the bleeding and get the communications specialist back into the fight, but Rodriguez was clearly operating on adrenaline and determination alone. Thompson had found a position where he could observe the western approach and was calling out ranges and target information to his teammates. His wounded leg had stiffened up, making movement difficult, but his tactical expertise was helping coordinate their defense against the multi-directional assault. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, but Chen could see that the enemy assault teams were only moments away from overrunning the SEAL position. The timing was going to be incredibly close, and there was no guarantee the air support would be able to distinguish between friendly and enemy forces in the confused close-quarters battle. Rodriguez was frantically working his radio, trying to provide the helicopter pilots with precise targeting information while bullets cracked overhead. His wounded shoulder made it difficult to maintain stable communications, but he managed to establish contact with the lead attack aircraft. Chen spotted movement on the eastern ridge, where she had eliminated the machine gun team earlier. New enemy fighters had moved into that position and were setting up to provide covering fire for the assault teams. She engaged them at maximum range, forcing them to abandon their setup and take cover. The Western assault team had penetrated closest to the SEAL perimeter, using a dry creek bed to mask their final approach. Chen could see them preparing to emerge from cover when Morrison spotted them and directed concentrated fire from his position. The team leader's tactical awareness was keeping his men alive through the chaos. Davis had positioned himself to cover the southern approach and was making every shot count with his limited ammunition. The sniper's precision was taking a deadly toll on the enemy fighters, but there were simply too many targets for one man to handle effectively. A new threat emerged as Chen spotted an RPG team moving into position on the northern ridge. If they managed to get a clear shot, the rocket-propelled grenade could devastate the SEAL position and end the battle instantly. The range was extreme, but Chen had to engage them before they could fire. Her first shot missed due to the difficult angle and wind conditions, alerting the RPG team to the threat. They immediately began moving to a more concealed position while preparing to fire. Chen adjusted her aim and fired again, this time hitting the gunner just as he was shouldering the weapon. The RPG exploded against the mountainside as the wounded gunner accidentally triggered it, creating a spectacular fireball but no damage to the SEAL team. His assistant tried to recover the weapon, but Chen's follow-up shot eliminated him before he could pose a continued threat. Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter with new urgency. The enemy was preparing for one final desperate assault with their remaining forces. Instead of the tactical approach they had been using, they were going to rush the position from all directions simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Chen could see at least 15 enemy fighters moving into position for the final assault. Her ammunition was down to her last magazine, and she knew the rest of the team was in similar condition. The timing of their air support would determine whether they survived the next few minutes. The lead attack helicopter finally crested the ridge, and Chen could see the pilot searching for targets while trying to avoid hitting friendly forces. Rodriguez was providing a running commentary of friendly positions and target priorities, but the pilot needed time to sort out the tactical situation. The enemy final assault began with a coordinated rush from 3 directions. Chen engaged targets as fast as she could acquire them, her auto-sniper rifle cycling rapidly as she tried to break up the attack. She could see Morrison and his team fighting desperately to maintain their perimeter, as enemy fighters closed to within grenade range. Thompson had saved his last explosive charge for this moment. As enemy fighters approached his sector, he detonated the device, creating a blast that eliminated several attackers and disrupted their assault formation. The explosion gave his teammates precious seconds to reposition and continue their defense. Murphy had exhausted his rifle ammunition and was now fighting with his sidearm while continuing to treat Rodriguez's wound. The corpsman's dedication to his medical duties even under direct fire exemplified the SEAL ethos of never leaving a teammate. Behind Chen's rifle clicked empty just as she was engaging the last group of enemy fighters approaching Morrison's position. She drew her sidearm and continued to engage targets at shorter range, but the pistol lacked the range and stopping power of her primary weapon. The attack helicopter pilot finally identified clear targets and opened fire with his 30mm cannon. The devastating gunfire walked across the enemy positions, eliminating multiple fighters and breaking the final assault. Secondary explosions erupted as the cannon fire hit enemy ammunition and equipment, but the battle wasn't over yet. Chen could see surviving enemy fighters attempting to withdraw to positions where they could continue to threaten the SEAL team. Some were wounded but still armed and dangerous, while others were trying to reach weapons caches hidden in the rocky terrain. The helicopter pilot was calling for smoke to mark friendly positions so he could safely engage the remaining enemy forces. Rodriguez was trying to coordinate the marking while managing his communications equipment with his wounded shoulder. But the situation remained chaotic and dangerous for everyone involved. Purple smoke billowed from Thompson's position as he deployed the signal marker to identify friendly forces for the circling attack helicopters. The distinctive color stood out clearly against the brown and gray mountain terrain, giving the pilots a clear reference point for their targeting runs. Chen watched through her scope as the lead helicopter made its attack run, its 30mm cannon systematically eliminating the remaining enemy positions. The pilot's precision was remarkable, placing devastating fire within meters of the SEAL team without endangering the friendly forces. Years of training and combat experience showed in every precisely aimed burst. The second helicopter had moved to a blocking position, preventing any enemy fighters from escaping through the valleys that led away from the compound. Its crew was methodically searching for survivors and ensuring that no threats remained to endanger the extraction operation that would follow. Rodriguez had finally managed to establish clear communications with the extraction helicopters that were inbound to their location. Despite his wound and the chaos of battle, the communications specialist had maintained contact with higher headquarters throughout the engagement, ensuring that support forces knew exactly where to find them. Morrison conducted a quick headcount and assessment of his team's condition. Everyone was alive, though Rodriguez and Thompson were wounded and would need medical attention once they reached the forward operating base. The team leader's tactical leadership had kept his men together through an impossible situation. Chen began policing up her equipment while maintaining overwatch on the surrounding terrain. Her auto sniper rifle had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, and she had expanded nearly 200 rounds of precision ammunition. The weapon had proved its worth in exactly the type of scenario it had been designed for. Murphy was conducting more thorough medical treatment of Rodriguez's shoulder wound now that the immediate tactical situation had stabilized. The corpsman's field dressing had controlled the bleeding during the firefight, but the communications specialist would need surgery to repair the damage completely. Thompson was struggling with his leg injury, but the explosives expert insisted he could walk to the extraction landing zone. His demolitions work had been crucial in channeling enemy movement and disrupting their assault formations. The controlled rock slide had eliminated at least 6 enemy fighters. Davis was conducting a final sweep of the area with his sniper rifle, ensuring that no enemy fighters were hiding in positions where they could threaten the extraction helicopters. His precision shooting throughout the engagement had accounted for multiple enemy casualties at critical moments. The extraction helicopters appeared on schedule, their rotors beating a steady rhythm that promised safety and medical treatment for the wounded. The pilots had been briefed on the tactical situation and knew exactly where to find the SEAL team in the rocky terrain. Chen provided overwatch as her teammates moved to the landing zone, her rifle trained on the surrounding ridges where enemy survivors might still pose a threat. The extraction had to be executed quickly and efficiently to avoid giving any remaining fighters time to organize another attack. The lead extraction helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, its crew chief immediately jumping out to assist with loading the wounded. Rodriguez was helped aboard first, followed by Thompson, who was limping heavily, but insisted on walking under his own power. The SEAL team's pride wouldn't let them be carried unless absolutely necessary. Morrison conducted a final radio check with the attack helicopters, ensuring they would maintain air cover until the extraction was complete. The team leader's attention to detail had kept his men alive throughout the mission, and he wasn't taking any chances during their most vulnerable moment. Chen was the last to board the helicopter, continuing to scan the surrounding terrain through her rifle scope until the very last second. As the aircraft lifted off, she could see the compound below that had been the center of such deadly deception. Intelligence reports would later reveal it had been used as bait for months, luring coalition forces into carefully planned ambushes. The flight back to the forward operating base gave everyone time to decompress from the intensity of combat. Chen cleaned her rifle methodically, a ritual that helped her process what had just happened. She had fired more rounds in anger during this single engagement than in all her previous deployments combined. Rodriguez was stable, but pale, the adrenaline finally wearing off as military medics worked on his shoulder wound. The communications specialist had maintained vital contact with friendly forces throughout the battle, even while bleeding and under direct fire. His professionalism had been instrumental in their survival. Thompson was arguing with the medics about the severity of his leg wound, insisting it was just a flesh wound that didn't require evacuation. The explosives expert's tactical use of demolitions had repeatedly disrupted enemy assault formations and saved his teammates' lives. His final charge had broken the enemy's last coordinated attack. Murphy was already planning the medical treatment Rodriguez would need once they reached the base hospital. The corpsman had performed battlefield medicine under impossible conditions, keeping his teammate in the fight while simultaneously engaging enemy forces with his own weapon. Davis was quietly reviewing the engagement in his mind, analyzing what had worked and what could be improved for future operations. The sniper's precise shooting had eliminated multiple high-value targets throughout the battle, but he was already thinking about how to be even more effective next time. Morrison was composing his after-action report mentally, documenting the tactical lessons learned from the engagement. The team leader would recommend Chen for a significant decoration based on her actions during the battle. Her intervention had quite literally saved all their lives. The helicopter crew chief informed them they were approaching the base, and Chen could see the familiar layout of the forward operating base spread out below them. Medical teams were already standing by to treat the wounded, and intelligence officers would want immediate debriefings on what had transpired in the mountains. As they landed, Chen reflected on how much had changed since that morning's insertion. She had proved herself under the most extreme conditions possible, earning the complete respect and trust of some of the military's most elite warriors. The skepticism she had faced initially seemed like ancient history now. The SEAL team would return to full operational status within weeks, but the bonds forged during this engagement would last for the rest of their careers. They had faced impossible odds together and emerged victorious through teamwork, skill, and an unwillingness to surrender, no matter how desperate the situation. Became Chen's auto-sniper rifle had proved its worth in exactly the type of engagement military planners had envisioned when they developed the weapon system. Her ability to deliver rapid, accurate fire at extended range had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the battle and turned certain defeat into hard-fought victory. The intelligence failure that had led them into the ambush would be investigated and corrected, but the tactical lessons learned would be incorporated into future training and operations. The enemy's sophisticated planning and execution had pushed the SEAL team to their absolute limits, but superior training and equipment had ultimately prevailed. As Chen walked across the landing zone toward the debriefing rooms, she knew this engagement would define the rest of her military career. She had faced the ultimate test of her skills and training under conditions that would have broken lesser warriors. The young woman who had learned to shoot on a Montana ranch had become a battle-tested special operations sniper who had saved the lives of America's finest warriors in their darkest hour.